Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade on this Monday, the Monday Schmooze. Dave Revs, Nicole Auerbach, and Howard Griffith. We had our first marquee showdown of the Big Ten season. I wouldn't say it'll go down as an all-time classic game, but we definitely learned a lot about two of the three best teams in the conference.
Yeah, we actually learned more than I thought. I think I've got more questions about Penn State, and we got more answers from Ohio State than I anticipated.
I was really impressed with the way Ohio State's defense played. I was really, not surprised, but I hadn't really focused and dialed in on them like that. This is a good defense. I like the growth that they've made year over year.
Yeah.
Amazing to turn what was the biggest weakness, certainly down the stretch last year, the biggest weakness, into what may be the biggest strength. And we can talk about how this team is constructed, but it feels like they're leading with the D, which has been unusual in the Ryan Day era. That game is our big story. Ohio State making it 7 in a row against the Nittany Lions. They did it with Marvin Harrison Jr. and that dominating defense. Harrison went off for 11 catches and 162 yards and a touchdown. The defense held PSU to 1 of 16 on third down. They had 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, as Ohio State improved to 35-2 in conference games under Ryan Day. Let's start there. Start with the Buckeyes. Let's start with the defense. And Howard, you talked about it, and it's interesting because we have spoken a lot this year about what Ohio State isn't. They are not a team that appears to have a Heisman finalist at quarterback. The last 3 QBs there have been Heisman finalists. They're not a team with an overpowering run game or a team with a great offensive line. The run game might be about injuries. That's certainly a big part of it. They have a great wide receiver. But they have this defense, and I think there are a lot of people who are taking a bit of a wait-and-see approach on the defense. Did this convince you? I mean, we can talk about Penn State's offensive struggles. Did this convince you that the D is above the level of a season ago?
And let's start up front. And here's why I believe that they're better than a year ago. I watched them with a 4-man rush create all kinds of havoc. And I think that's an important part because now when you switch to the back end, they were playing outstanding on the back end. But to me, it all starts up front and what they're able to do, creating pressure. And they're stopping the run up front as well. So I really like where it starts up front.
Yeah, and you know what it did immediately is it made uncomfortable for Drew Aller.
Yes.
Made it look difficult. I mean, he really struggled. We've talked about how, okay, maybe they didn't have the explosive plays to date, but he was in control of these games. He was making the plays that he needed to. And then you walk into a situation here where he looked uncomfortable all day, and the lack of talent at the receiving position really became apparent. They could not get separation on the back end, but also they couldn't help bail him out. We've seen those great receivers that Penn State has had go up and make plays, make up for things, keep them in games, and they couldn't do that. And Drew Aller really couldn't settle into this game at any point. And I wonder, too, the confidence that hit that you take in a game like that against a defense like that, if that impacts you again, even moving forward, and Ohio State beats you twice. But like that was all a credit to Ohio State's defense. The way they were getting pressure, the way they were in coverage, it was just really remarkable. Again, against an offense that really hadn't made mistakes coming in.
And I think it's a big part of Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles gets to focus really on the game plan because of what James Laurinaitis is bringing to the program as the linebacker coach. His linebackers are playing outstanding. They have a couple of packages that they will run out there, bringing styles in. They'll play with 3 safeties, really create some problems. And as I project down the line, he's going to be a huge part of what this defense has to do. But these linebackers are playing really well. I just was thoroughly impressed. I went back and watched the game this morning because I didn't want the recency bias. And I left here feeling one thing. I thought it was really all about what Penn State was not able to do. But what I watched in this game was Ohio State dictate the pace on defense. And that's impressive.
Well, in the third downs, I mean, you have to talk about that until that final drive, 0 for 15, right? So there was definitely some play calling questions, and I think a lot that we can talk about on the Penn State side. But the defense and their ability to get off the field was incredible. It was remarkable. Again, like all of these questions where, you know, maybe we were saying, hey, last year we felt pretty good about the defense, but then at the back end of the schedule, it was exposed or people were able to have these big plays. we've seen them now here and against Notre Dame, and we can talk about what these teams don't have at the receiver position. But we've certainly learned a lot about how good the defense is.
Right, and the thing that's interesting to me is they won the Penn State game last year, and I think the big thing that we all came out of that game talking about was defense, right? It was JTT had the amazing day. They forced a bunch of turnovers. They won it with big plays on defense. This year they won it with consistency on defense because Penn State in that game last year, they scored more than 30 points. They had nearly 500 yards of offense. They gashed them with big plays. Now, part of it, and again, I think you're kind of leaning towards what I want to try to parse out here, which is how much of it is that Penn State just isn't great offensively and how much of it is what you're saying that Ohio State truly is elite defensively. And I think it can be both those things, right? The two are not mutually exclusive. But it is interesting that even in a game last year where you'd say they won it with defense, you still came out of it worried about or questioning some aspects of their defense. That's not the case this year. But so let me ask you this. How much of it, Howard, in your opinion, even though you believe that Ohio State forced the tempo with the defense and dictated the game with the defense, how much of this is about what Nicole was talking about? There's not a difference maker, certainly not a difference maker at wide receiver. For whatever reason, the backs are not breaking the big plays they did a year ago. I think we thought the offensive line was improved, and maybe it is. Maybe Ohio State's defensive front is just that good. So I guess that's kind of what I'm putting back to you is parse it out for me. How much of this is about what Penn State didn't do right?
So there were a couple things, right? So JTT was an impact last year. He was a huge impact once again this year. And they tried to do some influence, some things with him to give him some different looks that he just did not go for. He really looked like a smart football player. There's a screen he snuffed out. They were trying to bring backs, or not backs, but tight ends across and guards across the formation to influence him. He didn't go for it. There was a play, a defensive tackle makes a play, snuffs out the screen. There was the two trick plays. They're playing cover two. There was never a fear, I believe, that these corners were going to get run by, nor the safeties. And let's talk about this too, because I thought where there could be some problems, because Notre Dame was able to exploit this, the tight ends and working the middle of the field. Having Styles in the middle of the field took that away. So there were just some things that I just don't understand. I'm not that I should, but I didn't understand some of the things that Penn State was ultimately trying to do, because it really wasn't working early and it didn't work late. They were able to run the ball and have some success, but then they were forced to get away from it.
Two runs.
Got away from it.
Yeah.
But also you mentioned trick plays. Why? In certain circumstances, right? Why were you doing that? Why are you, in a game of this magnitude? So I think there are questions about the play calling, but also things that we hadn't seen from Penn State defensively. They really didn't pressure Kyle McCord. It was the lowest pressure rate on dropbacks of the season, according to True Media. Also, lowest blitz rate, according to True Media on the season. Like, these were things that we have seen from the Penn State defense, that they were getting all these negative plays, getting all this pressure, and they weren't doing it as much. I don't even think Kyle McCord played all that great, but he certainly did a lot more than Drew Aller, and we were talking about that coming into the game. These relatively new quarterbacks, one of them had been tested against Notre Dame and been in this situation. One of them was going to be in this situation on the road for the first time. And Kyle McCord did what he needed to do. He got the ball to his weapon, and that's something that we haven't talked about either.
Yes.
One of these teams had Marvin Harrison.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
We're on the same page.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I like how much of that is on Drew Aller and how much of that is on they don't have as good a wide receiver room. Right? I mean, who does? Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver in the country, but Ohio State didn't have its number two wide receiver in Emeka Egbuka.
And they could still get it to Marvin Harrison.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because Penn State made the play that could have changed the game.
Yes.
Right? The fumble that was returned for a touchdown, and there was the hold on Harrison. And I think we all agree it was clearly a hold. No doubt it was a penalty. But it shows the impact that he has on that game. And so can you blame Aller if he can't, who's he supposed to throw it to? He doesn't have a weapon like that.
I left the game thinking, or left watching the game in here thinking, just don't know if it's right, the way they're calling the game, if it fits for him.
Yeah.
After watching it, that's not the case. I mean, he was under duress a lot. And what happens when quarterbacks are under duress, it pays off later in the game, particularly if it happens early. So I think they have to find a way to be consistent. And I'll say this. I thought the running backs for Penn State played unbelievably, and particularly in the pass game, because they were asked to do some things that you probably shouldn't ask them to do, but they were up for the challenge. So the pressure certainly wasn't coming from players that they were responsible for blocking, because I thought they did a great job on that. There were just some instances where there was pass protection that just was not there for him, and he couldn't step up. When he tried to step up in the pocket, there was a linebacker or the safety was sitting right there to take that away from him. And they never could get the ball to the tight end position either. They struggled there.
But receiver, the fact that they couldn't get separation, they aren't those types of receivers. They don't even have to be of Ohio State's caliber, but reliable, the type of talent that can break open a game or make a play to help the quarterback out, or even just pull some of that off the running backs. They're going to have to go in the portal, I think. They're going to really have to.
And they have, right? I mean, they went and got McLean but yeah.
You know, you got to hit it out of the portal,
Right.
but you've got to find those guys, because this is going to be a problem for Penn State against the two teams that we always compare them to.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, I think we went to camp and we're like, what does Cephas look like? What does McLean look like? Are these guys good enough? You lose Parker Washington, you lost some real talent off that receiving crew from last year. And I guess this kind of speaks to this bigger issue that is out there about Penn State. And I would just say, like, hey, there's still a really big game on the schedule for Penn State. And we stop talking about all of this, all of it, if they beat Michigan at home.
Yes.
And we'll get to that game here coming up in a few weeks. But Penn State has a really, really good program, a top 10 program. And we were talking about this on Friday. Like, all this goes away with the 12-team playoff. It doesn't matter. They'll make it a lot. But the inability to beat Ohio State when they're at their best, which is they've been at their best really for the entire time James Franklin has been there. And then once Michigan has gotten back to being Michigan, the challenges in beating them as well. Like, what's missing, Howard, in Penn State's program?
I guess if we look this last game, that elite wide receiver.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you can start to, because it's not like this Ohio State ran away with this football game. Both defenses played outstanding. Outside of the penalty, I mean, I didn't have any problems with what Penn State was trying to do. But then you talk about trying to open things up down the field. There was no fear in those guys. They played cover two sometimes. When they played off, they broke on the ball when they needed to. Now, let's be clear. Drew made some poor throws, but those poor throws, I believe, were a direct result of the duress he was under early. So they have to get that difference maker outside. I think ultimately that's what it ultimately comes down to, and they need to find them if they're going to continue to play the game this way. If you want to play this way in that style where 3 wide, you're running deep vertical routes, that sort of thing, you got to find the people that can get it done for you.
And we would have liked to see it also before this game. They didn't try that. They didn't add that to the repertoire. They didn't get Drew Aller and the offense comfortable even attempting those types of passes. So I think some of that can be obviously the personnel, but also like the lead up to these games, you know, and then calling them specifically, because we've been talking about some of the third down calls. It's just, that's the gap, right? That's the gap. We come out of this game always talking about what's the difference. The defenses were right there.
Yeah,
so
their defense played well enough to win.
They did.
Right.
And it's interesting, right? We're talking about what the difference is. It's explosion, something that this team has been able to create and has had since Coach Franklin has been there. For a while there, the narrative was you can't run it when you want to run the football. They figured that part of it out.
Right.
And they were coming up with big plays all the time. But now the big plays aren't there, and there's a reason why they aren't there.
Yeah, and to your point, Nicole, and then we should move on. But to your point, when you don't break those plays against UMass, that's when you get concerned.
They didn't really try.
And they didn't try. And so you think, hey, this is an obvious weakness. you've got to at least give your opponent something to prepare for, right? Put something on tape, and it just wasn't there. All right, let's talk a little bit about Michigan. Obviously, the highest ranked team in the Big Ten. This was utterly no contest against Michigan State. You were there.
Yeah.
I think you can vouch for the fact like this game was not in doubt 5 minutes in, 7 minutes in. I mean, it was over.
Yeah, it was not like the Indiana game and some of these other slow starts that we've seen from Michigan because they were just so dominant. They were just dominant on both sides of the ball. We knew that Michigan State was kind of need to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
They were going to need to not turn the ball over, which they did. They were going to need to maybe score first to kind of get the crowd into it. That didn't happen. And, you know, when Mike Sandersill had that pick six, he was coming right at me. Like, I was in that end zone, and I was watching it unfold. You could hear there was a lot of Michigan fans in the crowd. Like, it all works, and it all plays off of each other when you see this team up close. You see the physicality, the confidence that they have, but then you see the defense, right, and the impact and how that plays out for the offense. And JJ puts up a career high 4 touchdowns, and comes out of the game in the third quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, this is exactly how Michigan likes to win these games.
You being there, did it look like they were having fun, Michigan, the way they play?
Yeah.
And that's what comes across when you watch them on the screen, on television. It looks like they are having a tremendous amount of fun executing. And that becomes very difficult to try to stop because they can do it in so many different ways. And you talk about the unselfish play of this team, and I think it's been driven by, JJ, the class that came in with JJ, and the people that are now subsequently, if that's a word.
Subsequently.
Yeah, that word too. Behind them in those classes, that they buy into what Michigan football is all about. And it's been fun to watch. It comes across on the screen, and they are suffocating as a team. It's crazy.
Well, and so they've been using the tight ends a lot more, right? Like we've been talking about Colson Loveland a lot more. And like that just adds another a layer to this because they've been incorporating wide receivers, which they haven't always had. They've had injuries at that position. So the offense is pretty multifaceted, even though they don't really do the big plays because they don't need to. They just control the game, and they're just pretty methodical as they go down the field. And then the defense is suffocating. So there's just not much that goes wrong for Michigan in these games. Like they haven't really struggled. They haven't really felt like they were not in control of a game all season, but especially in these Big Ten games, they are just putting them, they're over by the end of the first quarter.
Now, again, they have not played a difficult schedule. I think we have to acknowledge that. But again, they have done exactly what you would expect a superior team to do against an inferior schedule.
By the way,
we will get these tests coming up. Yes.
You know who hasn't really done that? All of the other top teams.
Oh, I agree.
Georgia hasn't done that. Washington nearly lost this week. So
we had like 4 teams nearly lose to
and Michigan
vastly
is
inferior
just doing
teams.
this, and so to me that part actually helps me learn something about Michigan when these other teams are struggling to do it.
One other huge headline came out of this weekend. It's in the Big Ten West, Iowa City, Iowa, and Minnesota. If you haven't seen the play, Minnesota leading 12-10 in the closing minutes. Iowa's Cooper DeJean bringing a punt back for an apparent go-ahead touchdown. But after the play was reviewed, officials ruled that DeJean, had given an invalid signal by waving his left arm. And invalid signals by rule mean the ball cannot be advanced. So the touchdown was taken off the board. Iowa eventually turned the ball over, and it was Minnesota that ended up winning the game. Fascinated to get your take on it. Howard, I want to start with you. Let me just preface this by saying that on Saturday I got in touch with Bill Carollo, who oversees officiating for the Big Ten, and I said to him, was this the correct call? He said it was the correct call. It is a reviewable play. So in other words, the fact that they did not call it on the field does not mean that it cannot be called subsequent in the review. I would come out of this, and I'm interested in your take. I would come out of this saying, okay, like it might be the right call, but then it's the wrong rule. Like it's a bad rule because everyone on the field kept playing. No one thought he had called for a fair catch. So I don't think you can blame the officials. I think maybe you can blame the Rules Committee and say we revisit this, but interested in your take.
And I think part of it is, right, that there were teams that were pushing the envelope, right? Because it used to be right here. This is where it had to be. Now I can understand when you're tracking The body does a lot of crazy things when you're trying to catch punts and you're moving in a different direction and you're trying to keep your balance. So I can understand how his arm is moving around. That all is fine and makes sense to me. It's just unfortunate that the rule is the way it is, that they had a chance to review it, because I don't think he was trying to deceive anyone.
And if he was, he did a terrible job of it, because everyone on Minnesota thought the play was live.
Yeah, they
right?
did.
But let's be clear.
Yes.
You better think the play is live. You play, even when there's a fair catch, you play snap to whistle,
Right.
is what you always do. So I wouldn't necessarily go with that. Both teams should have been playing. I don't believe his intent was to deceive. And he was just trying to keep his balance. And it's really unfortunate.
Or you're trying to, get guys out of your way or whatever it is. But I think your point is right on this about it. If it wasn't reviewable, if it wasn't obvious in the game, in the moment, and then you're doing this when everyone did react because they played it all the way out. You can see PJ Fleck on the sidelines reacting because he's like, oh crap, they're about to run this all the way back.
Yeah.
Can we block it? I think that's what's really frustrating. I've never seen this called in a game.
So it was called in the Big Ten in 2015, Wisconsin, Illinois, Wisconsin, Northwestern. Wisconsin ran a punt back, and the signal, frankly, was like a safe sign, but they called it on the field. That was the difference.
Okay.
It was called on the field in that one. But I remember us having this same conversation about, like, wow. Certainly, I don't think anyone on Northwestern thought he was calling a fair catch. Northwestern ended up winning the game. The punt return would have put Wisconsin on top. I know the issue for a lot of people is that it wasn't called on the field. Again,
And then
by the letter of the law, it's reviewable.
Yes, but everyone thought they were reviewing if his foot stepped out, right? So that's also the surprise of then that becoming the possibility that it comes off entirely as a play was shocking. But here's the point, too. And you guys made this in the final drive, and everyone's made it. Yes, there's a lot you can make about this play. But also, this is an offense that only had 12 yards in the second half, and surely could have done more to actually win the game and not have it come to this. We've just been used to Iowa winning these games on like one great play, right? One great play and then defense. But there's still so much more they could have done offensively in this game.
It should never come down to that.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to be able to be efficient offensively. And it's I'm not even going to say it, but I think this is a rule that should be revisited. I think it needs to be very clear, but where is the deception? Is it here?
Right.
Right. Where does it become deceptive?
Right. And then you're really you're splitting hairs, right? Like, was his hand above his shoulder? Like, for a very brief second, it was above his shoulder, but barely. Like, I don't think anyone who knows football would look at that and say he's calling for a fair catch.
No. It didn't look that way.
Okay,
at all.
hey, let's give a little credit to Minnesota here, or a lot of credit to Minnesota. This is a huge win for them. They lost 8 in a row to Iowa. They had not played well their last couple times out, and to win this game is really significant, and it puts them legitimately in the West race.
It does, and we were talking last week coming out of this about Iowa and the path that was clear ahead of them. Well, this is very muddy. It's not clear, and Minnesota will be in the mix. And all of these teams play so similarly sometimes, right? About the defense and, maybe it's hard to move the ball. So if you're comfortable to win a game 12-10, you're going to be in the mix. And you saw PJ afterwards. He was so emotional and so excited about winning this game because it's been the game that he can't win since he got to Minnesota. So they don't care about that the flag and the controversy around this because they did win. Yeah. They played well enough in what they did to be in a position to win that game. And they're going to celebrate that regardless of all that unfolded. And it does put them in the mix because these West teams all going to have multiple losses. They're all going to beat each other a little bit, and it still feels incredibly wide open.
It is, and that's exactly what it is because they all play such a similar way offensively, right? Everyone isn't as challenged offensively as Iowa is, but Iowa is able to pick it up in some of the other areas. But it's going to be interesting, particularly if we have some things happen in the East that Coach DiNardo is predicting, that the top 3 teams will all have a loss.
The tiebreakers?
The tiebreakers have to go down to number 5.
And the tiebreaker would be about the conference. If you go down the last tiebreaker, which were that to happen, would be the conference record of your West Division opponents. So there is going to be a lot of watching and jockeying and hoping and praying for whatever result might happen in the West. It could just be.
It's going to be fun,
Oh,
kids.
it is going to be fun. Our big stat brought to you by Gatorade. Rutgers topped Indiana 31-14 on Saturday. The win improved the Scarlet Knights to 6-2 on the season, meaning they are bowl eligible. The earliest point on the calendar. Rutgers has locked up a postseason game since 2012. First time they've hit 6 wins in any season since 2014, which was their first in the Big Ten. As our official Rutgers correspondent,
Yes.
Nicole, I'm going
here.
to allow you to go first on the accomplishment, a great accomplishment for Greg Schiano and company.
Yes. We've been talking about this with the way the schedule was looking, right? This was going to be the day. This is so early for them to secure bowl eligibility. Important with the way the schedule gets harder.
Very difficult.
Down the stretch, but this is really impressive, and we've talked about it all season. The way that they've won these games, they run the ball, great defense, they control the games, and you could tell in the way that he was celebrating after this game how much it meant in terms of that step forward that you want to show. We've seen him do this before at Rutgers, so he knows what it takes, but it was just really encouraging, I think, on the heels of the comeback, the dramatic comeback a week later. To really control this one and to make no doubt that they were going to win this game and position themselves for this bowl. It is the step that we wanted to see this season, right? Those extra practices, that postseason opportunity, they matter a lot at a place like Rutgers. And so it was incredible and very cool to see the celebration and the emotion because this does mean a lot. It's been a long time.
They made a decision early the way they wanted to play offense by making Gavin a starting quarterback. They know where he has to continue to improve in the passing game. But that doesn't hold them back from playing the way they want to play. Now, you watch, and sure, he misses some plays, but still, what he brings to them in the run game, in the toughness to be able to do that, and then defensively to shut people down and make plays, is really significant. And I know how big it is to get to that 6th win, but I'm guessing that that's not what he's been talking about all year, right? Because, okay, if it's get to bowl eligibility, then what do we do when we get to bowl eligibility?
Right.
And that's where he continues to build. So I don't know if that was a stated goal for maybe the front of the room. People probably said, yeah, this is what we got to do. But there's so many other challenges that are in front of them that it's going to be fun to watch this team navigate that. Because, right, the schedule gets much more difficult. But to watch them play the way they have played already, to see how that really shapes up coming down the line.
Yeah, and how that defense will hold against some of these offenses that they've got down the stretch. I mean, the steps that they've taken, the improvements they've had defensively, I think are going to keep them in some of those games in ways that they haven't necessarily in years past. I also thought Gavin Wimsatt after the game when he was talking about he wanted to come to Rutgers to do things like this, to get them back where they want to be. I thought that was really cool too, because you don't always hear that from players who go to struggling programs that are trying to rebuild. He said it out loud, and it was awesome.
So anxious to get there, if you recall, that he left high school mid-season to come to Rutgers. Yeah, but it's amazing. I mean, the template, 55 rushing plays, 12 passing plays. They don't give up big plays. They haven't given up a play longer than 40 yards all season. The defense is really sound. They held Indiana, I think it was like 2 of 12 on 3rd down. Like, this is who they want to be. And then can you get better players? No disrespect to the guys they've got now, but I mean, if you start winning consistently, maybe you win some of those battles for 4- and 5-star guys or more consistently, and now all of a sudden you can follow the same formula, but you can do it with guys who everyone in the country wanted. And again, I don't say that with disrespect to who they've got, but I'm just saying this builds on itself. But it's a really good kind of template, a way to play here for Rutgers.
Well, that's why so often when you see programs reach a certain point, they're talking about they're stepping on the backs of the people who built the program. That's what we're seeing happen. The other thing that will be interesting that I want to find out this week, how many defensive plays have they played this year compared to this point last year? I think this defense is much more rested this year.
Well, we were talking, they were snapping the ball, right? We were watching this because Jerry and Urban had just done the great thing on the 4-minute drill on Urban Analysis and how when you're trying to milk the clock, you snap it with 2 seconds left. They were snapping it with 2 seconds left with like 9 minutes left in the game, right? And we're just saying like they could run this clock out with like 13 plays.
That's smart.
Right?
That's really smart.
It absolutely is. Wisconsin, Illinois, unbelievable comeback here for the Badgers. You got your backup quarterback. If you lose this game, having already lost to Iowa, having Ohio State coming in next, I mean, you could see, hey, they're out of it. Like they're going to have a really hard, well, no one in the West is out of it. They'd have a very hard time getting back to the spot where they could win the West. Incredible rally here on the road, backup QB beating Illinois.
Yeah, it really taught us a lot about like the heart of this team and the toughness. And I think you saw that in the way that Luke Fickell was talking about this win. And about the way that they were able to come back and never really gave up. But that Johnny Newton targeting call is really where the game flipped. And the concern for Illinois is obviously he's also going to be out for the first half next week. A week from now against Minnesota. But what we saw from Illinois offensively and the toughness, and then also to have a touchdown pass to a tackle, I love that. It was wild though. It was so fast. It was unexpected, kind of out of the blue, and really encouraging when you've got a quarterback stepping in, taking over this offense. Has been in a couple tough situations already where when he's needed to come into the game. And to pull off an upset, I would say an upset because of how far you were down, to do that was so impressive that I think, that confidence is going to spill over into future games, and the belief in each other and what they're building together will as well.
You talk about showing your teammates around you that you can make plays. That's what happened from the quarterback position. And the other thing that happened, Allen had some huge runs where he was able to pick up first downs and shorten the field up. And they were making plays that they needed to make. And we really hadn't seen them be able to take advantage of some situations, but they did. And that was what was good. The Illinois side, you saw the quarterback, man, he made some runs in this game and got this Illinois team out of some trouble. So if you have a quarterback that can make the throws, get you out of trouble, you're going to be in the game. But you got to take your hats off to the Badgers because, they played hard in this game, and a game that probably had gotten away from them.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to shout out what we saw because this is a team that lost Ches Malusi for the season, a team that lost Tanner Mordecai. Right. So they were already adapting and changing and evolving as an offense. We talk so much about what is their identity. Then you lose the two key players to that. You still have Braylon Allen, you still have the pieces around it, but to reinvent yourself, to not give up on this game, really impressive.
No doubt. Really good coaching job. It's a disappointing loss for Illinois, no question about it, because Illinois had gotten themselves back into the race with that win a week ago, taking down Maryland, and now you look at it and say 1-4. Again, I've just gotten done with saying no one's out of it, but it's going to be really challenging to come back and win the division from 1-4, and given how conducive their schedule was this year, this was a season where you felt like maybe Illinois could do it. What about Nebraska and Northwestern? Cannot say enough about how good Nebraska's defensive front was. Now, Northwestern's offensive line has a lot of problems.
Yeah.
They were not good last year, and they had arguably the best left tackle in America in Peter Skoronski. Yeah. It has really fallen off. They cannot protect at all. Yeah. However, Nebraska really played well up front on defense.
And I think that's the biggest thing. We've watched Nebraska defensively, particularly the front, play well in games. Coach likes to call them matchup opponents, or they may have a few more players, better players than their opponent. But they really show their dominance when they're playing against someone of their same caliber. And, that again, that's impressive when you start to think about how this roster ultimately was constructed. They're making plays defensively. They want to run the ball. They don't want to turn it over. Similar to the way Rutgers plays the game, they would like to play the game that way as well, at least at this particular point. But you definitely have to take your hat off. But Northwestern is just this has been a tough year. We've known that coming. Without all the things that have gone on off the field, this was going to be a tough year for them, and they just have not been able to get things going.
Also, in addition to the defense, which, the 8 sacks, the 13 tackles for loss, really impressive and aggressive. The Henrik Harburg bouncing back from 2 early interceptions, and really the offense doing what they needed to. Again, 17 points, not that much, but it works when your defense is giving up less than 10, right? Yep. So it puts you in a position to win. But again, just shaking that off. They've had so many turnover problems this season. But since he's taken over, they have responded better in game, I think, to when they've made mistakes.
This game was won on Nebraska's side and probably lost on Northwestern's side on those first few drives where Northwestern was in Nebraska territory every time, came away with, I think, a couple field goals.
That's not gonna
You
do
needed
it.
touchdowns.
Yeah, absolutely. And they busted a couple big plays into the secondary and didn't have the speed to pull away and score. And yeah, that's kind of where they are. Their defense, Northwestern's defense, played a lot better in much better spots than
Again, they continue to play hard each and every week.
They do. They were hitting hard out there. But hats off to the Huskers. They got Purdue at home coming up next. They're 2-2. I mean,
I think we're looking at a bowl team.
Oh, I think so for sure.
We're definitely looking at a bowl.
I'd be surprised and honestly a little disappointed if they didn't make a bowl at this point. Given
we've seen so much growth in year one from Matt Rule, and they deserve it.
Yeah, no, for sure. 4 wins now for them, 2-2 in Big Ten play. We'll take back to football. The AP poll came out yesterday. The top 6 stayed the same. Michigan still second. Ohio State still third. Penn State down 3 spots to 10th with its loss to the Buckeyes. Future Big Ten members, Washington and Oregon, still comfortably in the top 10. USC joined UCLA among the 2 lost teams after the Trojans fell to Utah. It was a weird week, and it wasn't a weird week because of the teams that lost. Really, the only team that shockingly lost was North Carolina, which lost to Virginia, who had 1 win all year coming in. But you look at Oklahoma, Texas, Washington, Florida State. You were talking about this earlier, kind of in relation to Michigan, where Michigan has not played down to the level of an inferior team. All of those teams nearly lost to heavy underdogs. So even though nothing changed in the top 6, maybe we think about some of these teams differently. I want to pose it to you this way as we look forward to the CFP and the first rankings here coming out in the not too distant future. Is there one team right now that you feel utterly confident in saying will definitely be in the Final Four?
I mean, Michigan feels like the team, right? I mean, they've just been so dominant on both sides of the ball and so consistent. And again, the knock is going to be the schedule, but the CFP actually hasn't really held that against them the last 2 seasons. I even think back about when they flipped them after they lost to Michigan State, and they were putting them above them because they just believed that they were a better team in the way that they were built. But Ohio State's resume is going to be maybe the best in the country by the time we get the first rankings next week. So they should be in there that we see next week. I'm curious to see how the committee handles Georgia's injury. This will be the first weekend we see them without Brock Bowers, what that looks like. And then the rest is we have all of these possible champions in all of these other conferences, multiple contenders, except maybe in the ACC, maybe it's just Florida State now. But how does the committee see those teams? I think they'll be impressed, again, by the completeness of the Michigan team on both sides and Ohio State's resume. And then I think Georgia, because they always are impressed with Georgia, and there is something to be said about just the belief that we have in that roster. But Howard, that's where I am on this. I think the rest is very much up in the air about how the committee sees them.
I do. I mean, I kind of feel like this is just one of those years where there's so much parity in college football, particularly when you talk about the top. There's really not this elite quarterback or I should say elite offense that is just looks unstoppable. Michigan has fewer questions. We quickly got answers about what USC ultimately has looked like, and they have a guy that a lot of people thought would win the Heisman. That's probably out right now, but you like what Washington and Michael Penix continue to do. It's going to be as much fun toward the end as I can remember, because you just don't. And I refuse to count out Alabama as well.
Oh, yeah.
They made a good case this week, right? I mean, you look at that game in the first half and you thought, okay, it's totally done.
Yeah, it's done.
Yep.
Right? Count out Nick Saban at your peril.
No, and I still think they're going to play for an SEC championship game in Atlanta. So you have them lurking. I mean, Oregon and Texas, depending on how long Quicken Ewers is out, those are teams that could win out and avenge their only loss of the season. So there's a lot of questions. I mean, I'm curious, how much voters, maybe they weren't staying up for Washington, but no offensive touchdowns in that game.
Yeah. And Arizona State is a one-win team.
Yes.
Yeah, these Arizona schools are hard to play, though, I will say. Like, they're tough.
They're one, I hear you,
I agree.
but I'm just saying,
I dropped them. I dropped
the
them.
5 teams that have beaten them previously didn't find them
That's
all
true.
that hard to play.
I did drop them in my rankings, though, because of the way that Washington needed to win that game. But that's why it is going to be fun, because I do think, we talk about in the 12-team playoff, you're going to have so many more teams still alive in the hunt. We're going to have a lot more teams alive in the hunt than we're used to seeing.
That's what's really cool. So I just went down right before we went on and was kind of going through how many teams I think could still make it. I think easily there are 13.
Yeah. It's never that high.
Never.
Right.
We're
And
usually
then,
at like
there are
6.
a few like, could Missouri make it? I mean, I suppose they could still. I don't think they're going to, but like mathematically they could.
They got Georgia next week. Good.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. I mean, that changed
Maybe you're
everything.
going to talk me into Mizzou.
But I'm saying like so 13 like clearly could make it, and then you start going down even further, and
It's pretty open.
I know. No, it's fun.
First date of the first CFP is when?
Next week, next Tuesday.
Ohio
Put it on your calendar.
Ohio State #1.
They could be.
They have the best resume.
They could be. They could be based on resume, for
They
sure.
do have the best resume.
Yeah.
And again, if you're going to encourage people to play good teams in a non-conference. It's not a great weekend for presumed Heisman frontrunner Michael Penix. We're talking about Washington. Their QB did not throw a TD pass, had 3 turnovers in that narrow win for the Huskies over Arizona State. Caleb Williams and USC dropped another one. Meanwhile, J.J. McCarthy and Marvin Harrison Jr. continue to shine. Is this the year the Big Ten ends its Heisman draft?
Okay, well, we love to overreact week to week about the Heisman because last week we were like, it's just going to be Michael Penix Jr.
It's academic at this point.
But listen, we have looked at these schedules, right? And there is one game called The Game at the end of the season that everybody watches, and 2 of those guys are going to be playing in that game. That is the ultimate opportunity for a Heisman moment. I don't think JJ's numbers will be overwhelming, but if you believe that he is the quarterback of the best team in the country, you're going to get votes for that. And then the same thing with Marvin Harrison Jr. If you believe he's the best player in the country, he's going to get votes for that. And I think we saw just how important he was, obviously, in this game. We've seen that over and over. He is a highlight reel. Whatever he does is going to be shown in those highlights, right, to all the voters around the country. So I think they're going to be squarely in the mix because, again, Michael Penix Jr. has a performance like he did against Arizona State. USC keeps losing. They're going to be out of it. You're really going to have these opportunities when you get to these meaningful games in November, and both those guys are going to be in them.
Yeah, I think if you believe in Michigan and you believe how good they are, you won't be caught up as far as the numbers
like
are
total yardage.
Total yardage.
Yeah.
And that. But he's got some games in front of him where he is going to have to be the difference maker or should be a huge difference maker in those games. I find it interesting when we continue to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. What happens if Marvin Harrison Jr. decides, hey, go catch some punts? Right? I think, if he were able to do some other things in special teams.
Touches, yeah.
Couple more touches. And what's scary is he had a couple more touches that probably could have been catches if the pass had been a little better. So he probably would have put up some bigger numbers than he already has. So this is going to be fun to watch. Just like, teams that are supposed to win championships, we don't know. This is the same year when it comes down to the Heisman Trophy. We don't really know.
Can't lose track of Jordan Travis, Jaden Daniels, both those guys very much on the radar. But I think much like the battle to make it into the college football playoff, this thing is suddenly a lot more wide open than it seemed 7 days ago when we were all but ready to engrave Michael Penix's name on that trophy.